On this episode of WarDocs, we speak with Army veterinarian Colonel Dickie Vest. Dr. Vest talks about his personal journey and describes the important roles that veterinarians play in the military health system, from caring for military working dogs to the very important food safety mission. He tells an amazing deployment story of caring for a working dog that was shot while supporting a mission and describes what it takes to resuscitate and evacuate an animal from theater. Dr. Vest describes the very important duties of enlisted personnel supporting veterinarian missions, and talks about current research and development programs supported by the military. Dr. Vest had the opportunity to lead an effort to transition a combat support hospital to a more modular field hospital platform, and explains why the field hospital is important for future conflicts. Find out more about Colonel Vest and our previous guests on our website, WarDocsPodcast.com, and make sure you follow WarDocs on your preferred podcast platform, and subscribe to our WarDocs YouTube channel. I'm your host, Dr. Doug Soderdahl, retired Army urologist.
Welcome to WarDocs, the military medicine podcast. This show brings you a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, WarDocs has you covered.
Today, we're privileged to welcome Army veterinarian Colonel Dickie J. Vest to WarDocs. Joey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to be a veterinarian, and how did you initially get involved in the military?
Sure. So when I was younger, I think in between the 8th and 9th grade, my mother took a office manager position on a large beef cattle ranch in North Texas. And a part of that was living on the ranch. And I was of working age, and so I was working on the ranch and working with all the cattle and the horses. And we had a lot of working dogs as well, herding animals. And just more and more as the veterinarians would come out to the ranch, mainly working on the cattle, I got to hanging around this one. He was kind of younger, Dr. John Horn, and he let me go out on other farm calls with him, and then ultimately started hanging out at the vet clinic there in Gainesville, Texas. And it just really seemed like a great life and a lot of fun. And that's what led me down the pathway to try to get into veterinary school. And I joined the Army Reserve Veterinary Corps a few years after graduation. I graduated in 98 from A&M. And in 2001, I joined the Army Reserve. And honestly, what brought it to my attention was the recruiting ads that were in our journal of the AVMA. And of course, they would always, romantically have an Army veterinarian in some far off place working on exotic species. And so I just approached a recruiter one day and I kind of got the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year spiel. And sounded like that wasn't too hard. And I'd probably get to travel to some cool places and do some neat things. So that, I finally got everything together. June 15th of 2001 is when I swore in. And then 3 months later, that 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year did not turn out to be true. But it's been a blessed career, and I would do it again over and over.
Yeah, I'm sure everything changed after that 9/11 happened, and all the initial plans and thoughts about what you're going to be doing maybe changed, but we'll kind of get into that. So I'm interested to hear more.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about the education and training that's required to become a vet. And does the military have a pathway, like a health profession scholarship program? Do they pay for vet school? How does that work?
Right. So either way, you're going through veterinary school, and on average, I'd say most people going into veterinary school, or at least a good percentage, have a bachelor's degree in something, undergrad. That's usually going to be something like biomedical sciences, animal science, biology. But every once in a while, you'll meet somebody that was, engineering undergrad. But each veterinary school has a set of prerequisites that you must take. And most of those are found within the degree plans of animal science, biomedical science, etc. But a bachelor's degree is not required to enter into veterinary school. It's just most of the time it's taken you close to 4 years to get those prerequisites done. And then getting into veterinary school it's challenging. It's getting more and more competitive every year. And so once you get into veterinary school, it's a 4-year program. And then after graduation, if you choose to do, in the veterinary industry, we call an internship a 1-year program. Then a residency is usually 2 to 3, sometimes 4, if you're working on an additional academic degree as well. And so if you've done all that as a civilian, then you can enter into the veterinary corps, whether it's active component or reserve component, as a direct commission veterinarian at the rank of captain now. It was first lieutenant when I joined. The HPSP program, and I hope I'm going to say all this correct. I'm not really into recruiting or acquisitions right now, but pretty much the way that program historically has run is, as a first-year veterinary student, you're in vet school, you can apply through that HPSP program. And if selected, then you're commissioned into the Army. They'll either do second lieutenant or first lieutenant, I forget, while you're a student. And then the Army pays for the remainder of the veterinary school, which in today's world is a huge, huge benefit. And plus you're a commissioned officer for the remainder of your time in veterinary school and doing military training during your breaks, like summer breaks, for example. So that's the two main pathways.
So I suspect that the military has had animals since the beginning of the Army and Navy, Air Force. Well, probably not the Air Force, but definitely the Army. When did the military first establish the veterinary corps, and do all 3 services have vets?
It's a great question. And if you haven't been in the military or around the veterinary corps, the average person may be surprised. So the veterinary corps was officially established in the middle of the First World War in 1916. And it started off with just like 70-something officers. And by the time the rest of the war, for the next 2 years, that grew to over 2,000 officers and over 16,000 enlisted. And as you mentioned, historically, sometimes our food has followed us along, on those trains, so to speak, on foot. And, veterinarians, a little bit different from the other medical professionals, since we are working on food animals, there's a lot of coursework and study into animal diseases, especially animal diseases that would then be spread through food. The public health portion, microbiology portion of our curriculum is naturally suited for us to at least have a good pathway to being a very good public health officer. There's a lot more training that you get once you get into the military. So one other branch does have veterinarians, the Air Force does, but they're limited to a public health role, and they're not clinically practicing veterinarians, and no other branches do as well. So the veterinary corps is actually the DOD executive agent for animal medicine across all branches.
So what is the primary mission of military vets at their home station when they're not deployed? And how is that different? You mentioned you're in the reserve, so I imagine that you have veterinarian practice in the civilian world. How do those 2 worlds compare?
A lot of similarities. So not every base by any means, but a good portion of our post or installations and our Air Force bases as well, and Marine Corps bases too, have veterinary clinics. And so the uniformed veterinarians are in those clinics. They're offering routine preventive medicine, sick call, surgery to the military working dogs, but also to service members, personally owned animals, or their dependents, and retirees as well can come on to the post and go to the veterinary clinic as well at a lower cost than you would expect out in the civilian sector. So that's all, very, very similar. Once you get into the food mission, that's a huge difference. So what a lot of people don't know as well is that a lot of the food items, if it's purchased and distributed by DLA, it's considered troop issue, meaning the military has given you this food. A lot of those foods have to be inspected. The food producing facility has to be inspected by the commissioned officer. And then at receipt, for example, at the DFAC, then our soldiers, and we'll talk more about that later, our soldiers do receipt inspections to verify that those food sources or those food items have come from an approved source. So bottled water is a good example. It may not seem that intuitive that Army veterinarians are out there inspecting all the water plants that we purchase from, but if you're drinking a bottle of water on any installation, CONUS or OCONUS, then Army veterinarians have been in there once or twice a year to approve that facility to sell to the Department of Defense. Some items are exempt. Carbonated sodas are just inherently safe, things like that. But a good portion of the food that you're eating on installations has been inspected at the production facility around the world, doesn't matter where they are. And then once the food arrives, it's been inspected by our 68 Romeo food inspectors. And then lastly, a little bit of difference, just because we have the military working dogs, we're also responsible for safety inspections of those kennels, both here and abroad. So that's a little bit different than private practice.
So you mentioned a little bit about the public health mission that the vets have. Tell me more about how you deal with animal-borne diseases and what are you looking for, not only at home, but in a deployed environment where we're going to see things that we don't see necessarily in the United States.
Sure. And rabies comes right off the top of everybody's mind as a zoonotic disease. And we certainly participate with our medical corps partners, preventive medicine teams. And for example, on installations, they'll have a as needed or on a cadence of meetings, any animal bite that occurs on an installation, and that case is presented to a board, and usually that board has a veterinarian on there, doctor, maybe the PM officer is there, and we review the case and the just kind of one, is the animal present for verification of vaccination or not? If not, then what's the risk, and should that soldier or person undergo the post-exposure treatment? So that's one of the things. But even with swine flu, bird flu, even influenza outbreaks, and we advise commands as their subject matter expert on anything that's zoonotic, but it's usually not in unison. It's always partnered with our other healthcare providers and subject matter experts, but it really boils down to advising commanders, and especially in the deployed setting. I mean, it's not uncommon for some animal disease to be spreading, or you're getting reports of things popping up around where we're operating. And so the commander of those troops needs to understand what the risk is, what we can mitigate and get down to that residual risk. So I'd say serving as subject matter expert advisors to the commanders.
How did that work in advising commanders during COVID-19? When there was some thought that it was, zoonotic from some bat species potentially to humans. What did the Vet Corps do during COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was for the Army Reserve, it was a tough time because for the most part, they just shut down, battle assemblies or drills. Everything was going remotely. But, another good example to kind of play on that was West Nile virus. And most installations would have a pretty robust testing kind of protocol or procedure for any birds that were found dead on the installation to see what the West Nile numbers were like at the time. I'm sure some installations are still doing that. But back to COVID, we were advising the commander again with our nurse corps, medical corps, or PM teams, just trying to give commanders the best medical advice that we could on reducing the transmission of disease.
So, what is the primary mission of veterinarians in a wartime deployed setting? What do you guys do when you get deployed to the war zone?
Yes, sir. So multifaceted. So it's around the three big pillars that we have are military working dog medicine, food safety, and zoonotic disease prevention. For the military working dog portion, for my career has been the CENTCOM theater, and you have heat and vector-borne disease, and so we're working with those dog teams, mitigating risk, work rest cycles based off the wet bulb temperature, trying to prevent and treat a lot of heat injuries to the dog's paws, making sure all of our external parasite control is in place to reduce those vector-borne diseases. But and when you look at a medical detachment, veterinary service support detachment, it's made up of these teams, and the thing which I'm partial, but I think is very neat about a medical detachment vet services is that we're really responsible for role 1, 2, and 3 care for those dogs. We have the equipment sets. If we have the right facility, cleanliness wise, kind of talk about some of that later too. We can do a lot for those dogs. And so you've got your basic sick call, emergency surgery, working with the dog teams on their kennel constructions. A lot of times you're advising with the Corps engineers on how to best construct a kennel project that we're working on. On the food side, we're still out there doing those commercial sanitary audits. For my deployments to the Middle East, I've been to all the stands except Tajikistan to do commercial sanitary audits where we're purchasing dairy, water, make fresh fruits and vegetables, whatever the case may be. So you're doing a lot of that. You're teaming up with your PM partners, and your soldiers are as well on food storage at the DFAC and the concessionaires. You're also advising those commanders on zoonotic disease. But there's also exercises with our partners as well. And those may be training exercises, and they may be more of a humanitarian relief. We're constantly getting spun up. We did on my most recent deployment on NEO activities. And if we have to, the U.S. government has to evacuate a lot of our diplomatic staff. They have pets with them, and those pets will need international health certificates and make sure they're healthy, and we're not going to import what we would call a foreign animal disease into the United States. And then probably not lastly, but mentioning lastly is we have a farm program. It's a feral animal risk mitigation program. And throughout, Iraq and Afghanistan, around the Middle East today, we have feral animals that make their way onto the installations. And you always have the little kind of feral cats running around the concessionaire areas. There's a bunch of them at like AUAB. There's a bunch of there in Kuwait at Camp Arifjan. And so what those vet teams will do usually with the contractors going to trap those animals, present them to the vet team. The vet team will anesthetize animals and spay or neuter them, and make sure that they're vaccinated for rabies, treated for external parasites, and so that the risk is mitigated for those feral animals to as much as you can. It's a multifaceted, a lot of roles that we play downrange while we're deployed.
Now, you mentioned role 1, 2, 3 care. How much interaction is there between veterinarians and traditional role 2 medical units like FRSDs, role 3 combat surgical hospitals? Do you guys connect each other if you need surgical materials? How does that work?
It's the contact and the communication is a lot, and generally that unit is deployed, under the command and control of a med brigade or a theater medical command, and so they're usually in that echelon above brigade kind of core area anyway. And so they're just naturally, geographically close to each other. But yes, absolutely. In the days of the cash and now the hospital center, field hospital construct, the vet unit and our human health providers are constantly in contact, and those larger hospitals often have deeper supply level maybe than that vet does, and so we definitely lean on them a lot for support. It's a great relationship.
Now, you have a lot of deployment experience. Is there a certain case that is memorable or that was challenging that really relied on your vet skills?
There is. There's military working dog Breaston. I was in Afghanistan, would have been 2007, 2008. I was stationed over at Salerno in the eastern part of the country, but that was back during the year-long deployments. And when the veterinarian from Kandahar went off for her R&R, then I went from Salerno down to Kandahar to cover that 3 weeks while she was gone. And during that time there, we had this military working dog that was shot 7.62 round through and through on one side of the chest, and had pneumothorax. And the dog was a special forces dog, and with all the people that came with the dog, never fully identified who everybody was, would make jokes about who we thought they were, but they were just a great group of guys and really loved this dog. But they're very talented medics. They, quote unquote, tap the dog's chest. They decompress that dog several times with a small butterfly catheter. Of course, they weren't able to correct and seal off the chest wound to where the collapsed lung didn't, recreate and gain air into the pleural space again. But they saved that dog's life because they got it to the vet clinic, and our clinic was a tent next to the runway there at Kandahar. So they got that dog there to us, and I was able to anesthetize the dog safely. Very nerve-wracking, anesthetizing a pneumothorax dog, but safely got him under anesthesia, got a indwelling chest tube placed, and we borrowed a thing that was called a pneumovac evacuation device from the Canadian cache there, and brought that over to the vet clinic. Got Breaston all hooked up to where we had constant negative pressure on that side of his chest, and he was doing really well. Tons of antibiotics, pain meds, but he was just a super aggressive dog. I mean, he was very good at what he did for a living, but that's always challenging for the veterinarians, and so we almost always have the handler there anytime we're doing anything simple, but oftentimes, those dogs have to be sedated a little bit. Not trying to paint a picture that our military working dogs are mean, but they are so bonded with that handler, and they are trained to do very specific things, and they're good at it. So Breaston, he was doing really good. Everybody's happy with his progress. I was in constant contact with his normal soft veterinarian back CONUS. And then, one of the things, it was already a challenging case, but something I would have not had planned on is I went by to check on him in the middle of the night, and he had kind of got to jacking with that tube, as dogs will, and that tube backed up far enough to where with every breath he took, he was pumping air into a subcutaneous space, and he just developed this massive emphysema. And I was there by myself, and he was in a bind, and he definitely needed some help quick. So I was finally able to get a collar on him and get a dose of morphine in him, and get him sedated to the point to where I literally from his feet, tail, head, neck area, I just had to manually massage towards the chest tube site and push all that air out of him. And I was honestly shocked at how effective it was, because it was just in the free space. It hadn't started getting into the tissues. So very fortunate there. Got all that done. He continued to do very well. And, we just had a great team. The special forces and agency medics, and there was a PA there that was super talented, and they'd come by and help me. Had a great 68 Tango there that was my animal care technician, and Preston did very well. We got him stable enough to where felt comfortable getting him on a plane to our dog center in Germany, and then follow on back to our main dog center, which is at Lackland Air Force Base, Joint Base San Antonio. And the Special Forces veterinarian that was his regular vet back at home, she and I were classmates together in vet school. And so I stayed and followed Preston's career along, and he ended up with multiple deployments through the rest of his career.
Well, that brings me to the next question is, obviously the job of the medics, if you can, is to return the patient, in this case, the working dog, to the battle. But sometimes that's not going to be possible because of the nature of the injury, and, they just can't get back. So, for soldiers and sailors and Marines, we can sometimes get folks from the point of injury through Role 3 in Germany to the United States in 48, 72 hours. How does that work for the military working dogs? What is the evacuation plan if they can't recover or they need a higher degree of care from where they are downrange?
That's a great question, and probably a lot of those unfamiliar with the military working dog program would be surprised to know that those dogs are soldiers, and they carry the same priority rights as you or I would, and that's for medevac, whether that's rotary, intra-theater, fixed wing, or inter-theater evacuation back to Germany or to the United States. And so, that gives those handlers great confidence in their medical support system, just like our soldiers should have great confidence that if they're hurt downrange, there's a great Army medical department standing behind them to get them the care that they need at the time that they need it. It's the same. You do your medevac request the same. Transcom has no. There's just no difference. Those dogs are extremely important to our mission and to the military, and it makes me proud to see the level of care that they get.
Now, can these dogs be connected to vital signs machines that humans use, or ventilators, or do you need your own specialized equipment for just about everything you do?
No, there'll be a few items that are veterinary specific, but no, routine monitoring, whether it's pulse ox or ECG or any of those, you can use same anesthesia equipment, X-ray, ultrasounds, all the same. And so that's one thing that's nice when we have the opportunity to do force development in our equipment. I'm just a big fan. If this is the ultrasound that is going to be in the field hospital, let's have that be the ultrasound that's at the vet unit. Especially during this last deployment, we were having problems with our CT machine at the USMHK hospital there at Camp Arif John, and I was trying to get a new one that matched the one that we had in Baghdad. So because we had the opportunity to swap parts, and so it makes it easier. But I'd say 90% of the equipment, Doug, it's identical, the same.
So you mentioned the bond that the handler has with the animal, but I also suspect that the unit, because they're part of the unit, also has a unique bond. Can you tell me a little bit how that the bond that soldiers have with working dogs, how does that affect the morale, mental health of folks on deployment?
Absolutely. So, within those dog teams, regardless of service, the bond is exponential. And a lot of times, when it's time for retirement of that dog, that handler is going to adopt that dog. And so, those dog teams, regardless of how many individual teams are within the unit, that bond there is very high. But then going outside of that, just when those dogs are out working, and maybe they're doing some patrols around the concessionaire area, the PX, or at the gate, and soldiers civilians, any military member sees those dogs, it one probably makes them a little sad, missing their pets at home, but it's also just making them miss their pets in a good way. So, from a mental health, behavioral health standpoint, those dogs do way more than what we're just using them for. But then, you look at emotional support dogs, and some units will have those, like a COSC, a Combat Operational Stress Control Unit, may help facilitate bringing in emotional support dog, or there may be some local volunteers. There was in Kuwait, and the vets help facilitate making sure those animals are healthy and they're safe to be around animals. But yeah, it's hard to replace, just getting to sit there and have a dog come up to you and smile and wag their tail and let you pet on them for a while. It's great for soldiers, for sure.
So besides military working dogs, what other types of animals do military vets care for? I suspect they care for the pets of dependents and active duty folks, but are there any other military animals that the vets care for?
Absolutely. So, and you're absolutely correct. So at those veterinary clinics, and people are bringing in their personally owned animals. So that's, cats, dogs, if the veterinarian chooses to see pocket pets or rabbits and things like that, they'll see those as well. But we still own quite a few horses. So we have military working equids, and mostly for ceremonial use, but there's areas around the United States. I was stationed over at Fort Sam for a year, and I took care of all the caisson horses there, and the horses at the MWR stables that were government-owned animals. And also there at Fort Sam, I got to take care of the deer for a year at our beloved quad. And so that was a lot of fun. But for the horses, they're not, huge in number as they were in the past, but we still do have quite a bit. They've had me come out to Fort Irwin several times to take care of the Marine Corps has a color guard unit out there. And then there's a demonstration unit where they do the shooting contest and things like that. So there's still some horses on the books. But also, interestingly enough, there is a marine mammal program in California that the Navy runs, and they use dolphins and belugas for mine detection. And so the U.S. Army Vet Corps plays a small role in some of the healthcare of those animals as well. So, and if you're in laboratory, we do a lot of research. There's a lot of laboratory animals as well. So a wide variety of animals for sure.
So tell me a little bit more about the role of the enlisted personnel supporting veterinarian missions.
It's massive. They definitely are at the core of what we do. On the food mission side, as I mentioned earlier, 68, we have two main soldier types, the 68 Romeos. Those are food inspectors, and the 68 Tangos are animal care specialists. And then we have a warrant program for the Romeo food side. But on the 68 Romeo side, mentioned earlier that they're the ones doing all these receipt inspections. And so when those trucks come in to the unit, or to the DFAC, for example, or to the TISA, they're verifying that every single one of those food products is from an approved source. And that's done. We have a worldwide directory, it's called, of approved food sources, and they're making sure that nothing that's unapproved is making its way into our soldiers' hands. And so they do the bulk of all that work. And also our Romeos partner with the PM teams to do sanitary inspections of the concessionaires and the DFACs. And an easy way to think about, like, how I explain the food from production to consumption in the DFAC is the Vet Corps kind of owns it from production to the installation, including while it's in storage, out in all those refrigerated connexes, for example, behind the DFAC. Once it goes through the back door of the DFAC, that's really a preventive medicine mission at that point. But the 68 Sierra soldiers in the PM units, the 68 Sierras and 68 Romeos are really very similar MOSs. And so they partner up a lot of times to do all that. For the operational rations, that's a huge mission for our 68 Romeos. Those constantly doing extensions on that shelf life and inspections to see if they're fit for consumption. If there's a condemnation, there's a massive amount of paperwork that these guys are, subject matter experts on. And, I know we joke about the MREs and that they're bad and everything, but I can guarantee you they're safe. And that's because our 68 Romeos are out there making sure they do a great job. The 68 Tangos on the military working dog side, they're doing cursory physical exams. They're doing a lot of our treatments for us. They're helping with the kennel inspections and responding to initial sick call, physical exam of our service animals as well. So yeah, our soldiers couldn't say enough good things about them. They're awesome.
So you mentioned a little bit about research. What are the current primary research and development needs for military veterinarians? And does the military support that kind of research that's needed?
Well, first I'd say that there's a huge amount of support and a huge focus on both the food and the military working dog side, but on the dog side that I'm more familiar with, as we, as a joint force, are preparing for large scale combat operations, and we're looking, at the not just the Army, but the AMED of 2030, of 2040, and looking at things like remote monitoring for soldiers and military working dogs that have been injured far forward, away from where the medical assets are. As that is all developed for our soldiers, then we have to develop that for our dogs as well. Talk a little bit about blood and blood products. Pretty passionate about that because it is critical to these military working dogs as it is for our soldiers. And just recently, having been that, theater medical command or med brigade forward coming out of Kuwait, the blood program for us as soldiers is a super deliberate, robust program, and we just don't have that level on the dog side. SOCOM is doing a great job, and rightfully so. They're out there doing a lot of these hard jobs, and their dogs need that support. And it's just hard to have, like a walking blood bank for the dogs, because you may just have two deployed or two or three, and by our, not necessarily standard, but I'd say a best practice is if I use this dog as a donor, that dog really shouldn't work for a little bit. Give them several days off. Should not be on a fixed wing airplane for a little bit of time until we get that red blood cell count back up. But to me, what's fascinating is there's a lot of work on freeze dried plasma, on human and canine side. So I know USAMDA and SOCOM are leading the way on that, and there's some civilian institutions working on that as well. We used to have a product called oxyglobin that was a manufactured hemoglobin, shelf stable, room temperature, for 2 years, and I've used that in dogs, and I'm pretty sure Breston received a couple of bags of that back in 2007 because it was still on the market. But we need more things like that with the short shelf life of whole blood, 28 days, depending on which anticoagulant you use. But that's a short shelf life, and if you're going to try to use some frozen plasma, you got to have everything to thaw it out, and I would say more shelf stable, longer shelf life, deployable blood products, volume expanders, hemoglobin or red blood cell support. I think those are most important in my opinion right now, and a lot is being done as we speak.
You alluded to this before when I was mentioning the combat support hospital, and that the Army has gone through a transition to a field hospital, more modular concept, and having hospital centers. And you were kind of part of that planning and execution process for a particular unit. Tell us a little bit about why the field hospital, this newer concept, is important, and any lessons that you learned during that process.
I had, just a blessed opportunity for 3.5 years. There's a combat support hospital out at Camp Parks that had a command vacancy, and I interviewed and was selected. That was not a CSL select position, but took command of that cache. And the number one job that I had on my plate was transformation, and we were converting that to a hospital center. And the hospital center that it would become, just as luck would have it, it was on the CSL list for the next iteration for the command board. And so I put that as my number one pick, and again, blessed to had the opportunity to command the 820th Hospital Center there at Camp Parks, California. And so I never changed office. Yeah, it was the same building, but just the sheer amount, Doug, of equipment. I tell a lot of people that my career has blessed me because I've always been around super talented logisticians. And that's also a little bit of a curse because I haven't had to learn about it because I had people around me that were just so awesome at it. But in this position, you had to get into it. And so, the lateral transfers and the turn-ins, everything from major end items to every piece of OCIE, personal gear that was on the property books, you had to essentially balance that property book. You had to close that thing out before you could start the other one up. So learned a ton about logistics during that time. But what's neat is, the cache is just a big, huge animal, to get that thing set up. And sometimes during our, annual trainings, exercises, et cetera, you'll get, comments about, well, we're going to have you jump that cache. And no, you don't understand. Once we get this thing set up, it's dang near permanent, Can be done, obviously, but it's a lot of work. With the field hospitals, they're more modular, and commanders can make choices based on, what the conflict is going to look like. If you need, because you have a medical augmentation debt, you have a surgical augmentation debt, that you can just building block that thing together to tailor it to what that environment looks like. And they are easier to use. And with that hospital center as the command and control for two of those field hospitals, and they can, command and control two of those things with any reasonable geographic distance. It's way more, modular, deployable. You can tailor it, to the mission. And, what was fun for me is I'd been in a cache before as a XO, and previous as a vet corps officer, when we'd go down to South America or Africa to do our medical readiness training exercises, I would usually fall up under a cache. And it was always just really intriguing to me, and I wanted to be a part of a cache. And so, that opportunity to be the chief of staff was awesome. But then to go command one all the way through the transformation into the field hospital, and then in ramping up for deployment, I had just another great opportunity to command the medical brigade that was over that hospital and the new field hospitals. And in my last 3 weeks in brigade command there, we were at Fort Hunter Liggett, and those very soldiers that I'd had, at that point 2 commands ago down in the cache, they're out there setting up these field hospitals, and it's kind of a tear-jerking moment to watch those young soldiers set those things up and see them in operation. Really, really fulfilling experience to have gone through all that.
One thing I never got a chance to do, but I got a chance to see folks who were participants because I was stationed at Fort Sam, was the Medical Strategic Leadership Program. And you got an opportunity to do that. Tell us a little bit about that course and why it's important for medical leaders.
It's a wonderful program, and I was very fortunate to get selected. It's kind of hard to get selected for that thing in reserves, but I tried a couple of times and was successful, and consider myself very lucky to go. So the 2-week program is held there, like you mentioned, at Fort Sam Houston. It's three phases: Fort Sam, New York City, and then Washington, D.C. So it's attended by all services and our international partners, and it's a very multinational class. And I would say the class size was probably, I don't know, like 20, 25 people maybe. So you get to know everybody really well. And so you start off there at Fort Sam, and you have some great lectures from senior medical leaders that have a ton of experience under their belt. And they get to kind of tell you about what they see in the future for the Army Medical Department. And then you go to New York City. You go to the UN and visit with different offices there that are related mainly to medical, and that's a few days. And then you go up to Washington, D.C. You go to the Pentagon, and you go to a few different think tanks around town, and talk to some of those nonprofits and the NGOs on what they see as the future. And they just have some really great insight into what's going on globally, medical, and not just focus on military. You spend a little bit of time with congressional aides. And I think part of the creation maybe of that medical strategic leadership program was for medical leaders that didn't get the opportunity to go to war college, to focus on some strategy for a couple of weeks and really, look at strategy and critical thinking, and trying to think ahead of what the Army needs to look like in 2030 or 2040. And, for everybody there, for our international partners and for us, I do think it's really kind of plays into our national security strategy as far as reassuring partners and allies.
So we may have some folks that are listening to our podcast or watching it on YouTube that are interested in becoming a veterinarian or are currently a vet and want to know more about military service and what's good and bad about it. What advice would you give to that person who came to you and said, "Hey, what do you think about being in the vet corps in the military?"
If I were talking to a undergraduate college student, I would encourage them to, veterinary school is going to the job of the veterinary school is to make you a very capable veterinarian. On the food side, I would say that, if you're going that way, I would encourage people to take some public health classes, food science, food safety during their undergrad time, because when I was going through veterinary school anyway, I probably speak for some others too. I didn't have military in the plan, and so once I joined the military, and now I've got this huge food safety role, which the Army has a lot of training available for that. It was a little overwhelming for me, but I grew to really enjoy it a lot. Fell in love with our food mission. And then for those that are in vet school or are already veterinarians, I just say if you're looking for an opportunity to be a world-class canine practitioner, then the Army is definitely the place for you. You'll never be able to do all the training that the Army has available to us as veterinarians. But I'd give them advice that they're going to work very hard and get ready for that, and be prepared to be a student for the rest of your career. The day that you walk across the stage from veterinary school as an Army veterinarian, it's not over. You have all your professional military education to keep up with. You have all your clinical education to keep up with. A high percentage of our active component veterinarians go through residency training while they're in uniform. So it's really unlimited. So work really hard and be prepared to make some decisions in life that are bigger, than yourself. I would say is that there's sacrifices for you personally, and sacrifices for your family and friends and your support network, and that can be tough. But I'd say rest assured the things that you're going to do as a veterinary corps officer are going to impact the AMED. They're going to impact soldiers' lives. They're going to impact military working dogs for years to come. So it's a lot of hard work, a career of being a student, but the rewards are really great.
So when the history books are written 50, 100 years from now, how would you like your legacy in military medicine to be recorded?
Well, I don't know that anybody's going to write anything about me, Doug, but it's been a blessed career. And, going back in time when I was selected for War College, and before that, and some people may not know that, you as a medical corps officer, Doug, dental corps, vet corps, that, after basic officer course, you're not required to do the professional military education that's, now known as Captain's Career Course and ILE. And, back in my early days, I saw everybody else meant, like Medical Service Corps officers, for example, fighting to get into Captain's Career Course. And I just thought, well, I guess I need to go do that. Everybody else, kind of the Army way, right? You see somebody stand in line, you go stand in line because they're giving out something for free. But I just kept up my professional military education, and I enjoyed it. And so after ILE, I started kind of studying, what's this War College thing? And the more I looked at it, the more it just fascinated me. And again, blessed to have been accepted on the first time that I applied. And at that time, I only knew, and we'd even looked at the population of vet corps officers, and we could only find one former graduate from the War College. And it caught a lot of people's attention in the veterinary corps, that I'd been accepted, that I was in it. And then there might have been a few people surprised that I passed and graduated. But, that was seen across the veterinary corps. And since then, a lot of vet corps officers have gone through War College. I'd love to think that maybe I had something to do with that. I had an opportunity to be an interim commander for a medical battalion, multifunctional. And then the CASH, when I took command of that CASH, there's a general officer saying, I think you're the only third vet corps officer to command a CASH. And I think he also said one of them was relieved, so don't be like him. And I just had a group of friends, vet corps friends, and we were battalion and brigade commanders and doing all these things that just, not that nobody had done before, but very uncommon and just not real traditional. And so I guess if there was a legacy looking back, I'd just like to say that maybe I've helped some vet corps officers be more deliberate about their professional military education, take the hard jobs, take some commands, and do something different than just being a vet corps officer your entire career. So maybe that can be it.
Well, we've been speaking with Colonel Dickie Vest on WarDocs podcast. Joey, thanks again for sharing your experiences and insights with us, and thank you for your service to this nation. I learned a lot about what it takes to be a vet in the military, and I know that our audience is going to appreciate listening to this podcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I would have wore my WarDocs shirt, but I ordered it this week, so I'll have it maybe next time I see you.
We can Photoshop that on this
this
podcast. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to WarDocs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. WarDocs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team WarDocs on WarDocsPodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, WarDocs has you covered. Spread the word.